To kill the body, go for the jugular vein. Ukraine knows this approach well, and it's just delivered a devastating slice to the main artery that is keeping occupied Crimea alive. 1.5 million Russians are now looking at their decision to occupy Crimea and despairing. The final phase of Ukraine's plan for the de-Russification of Crimea begins now, and it all comes down to a bridge. But it's not the bridge you're thinking about. So much attention is paid to the Kerch Bridge, which connects mainland Russia to Crimea, and rightly so. Russia poured at least $3.7 billion into building its 19-kilometer lifeline into the occupied peninsula for a reason. It was supposed to serve as the key direct road link that connects Russia to Crimea, making it vital for Putin's military. But that major bridge isn't the only one that is helping Putin to ensure that Crimea stays Russified. There's another one, and it has arguably been even more important to Russia from the very moment that Putin invaded. Located in the village of Chonhar, this bridge connects the occupied southern regions of Ukraine to Crimea. It runs through the Kherson Oblast as part of the Zhankoy crossing, and it's part of a major land route that connects occupied Crimea to portions of Ukraine that are currently under Russian control. In short, this bridge and the roads that it connects are vital for Russia, as they serve as a logistics corridor that allows troops and supplies to be shuttled between Kherson and Crimea. Even more than that, the Chonhar Bridge has symbolic importance. When Putin launched his invasion, it was this bridge that enabled Russia to shuttle troops into southern Ukraine quickly. The Chonhar Bridge was a major reason why Russia was able to enjoy so much success during the early weeks of the war, and there is even speculation that turncoats inside Ukrainian intelligence enabled Russia to use that bridge to overwhelm the Ukrainian south early in the invasion. That speculation hasn't led to any major arrests. Still, it highlights that the Chonhar Bridge is often overshadowed by the much larger and much more impressive Kerch Bridge. Ukraine just brought that bridge back into the spotlight. The news broke on June 7th. An overnight drone operation carried out by the Ukrainian military had targeted the Chonhar Bridge. The operation succeeded. The bridge has been damaged so heavily that it will probably take months to repair, meaning a vital lifeline that connects Crimea to occupied Ukraine has been severed. This is the jugular vein taking a slice from which it may not recover. And what we're seeing here is the entry into the final phase of Ukraine's plan to liberate Crimea. First, Ukraine isolates, then it destroys. That strategy is creating all sorts of problems for Putin, as you'll soon learn. But first, there's a strike to cover. According to the Kyiv Independent, Ukraine's 1st Separate Assault Battalion teamed up with the country's Code 9.2 drone unit for a joint operation that shattered the bridge. Ukraine's goal was simple: cut off the only major route that Russia is able to use to deliver personnel and supplies from occupied Crimea to the front lines in the Hulya Polar sector. Dmytro Filatov, who is the commander of the 1st Separate Assault Battalion, pointed out that this wasn't a strike conducted simply because Ukraine had the opportunity. There was a specific purpose. This was done specifically to block the supply routes for fuel and lubricants for the 37th Motor Rifle Brigade, Filatov declares. What we see here is a Ukrainian strategy that has worked wonders throughout 2026, shatter logistics in the rear to weaken Russia on the front. The result was a strike that Alexander Nastenko of the Code 9.2 unit claims will require a colossal amount of work to repair. And there can be no doubt that Ukraine did precisely what it has claimed to have done. The Code 9.2 unit showed us how the sausage was made for this strike in a June 7th video. The highlight comes at around the 1-minute mark when we see the view from the drones that Ukraine used as they crash into the Kherson to Crimea jugular vein. We also get a glimpse into the inner workings of a Ukrainian drone operation, with the occasional shot of a command center revealing just how high-tech this operation was. This is not an isolated action, it is systematic work, the video's description declares. It's also work that has seen Ukraine use a brand new middle-range drone for the very first time. But before we get to that, the Code 9.2 unit's video isn't the only direct evidence we have that the Chonhar Bridge has been heavily damaged. More comes from Russia's authorities. They're panicking, and they should be. They now have to try to explain to Putin why a bridge that was key to the Russian war effort was struck, and why Russia's air defenses once again utterly failed to stop Ukraine's attack. The new drone has something to do with that, but for Russia, all that matters right now is the damage. The Russian puppet Volodymyr Saldo, who the Kremlin has installed as the head of occupied Kherson, has confirmed that damage has been caused to the bridge that crosses Lake Sivash to connect occupied Ukraine to Crimea. As a result of a night UAV attack, the bridge deck was damaged in the area of the Chonhar settlement. For security reasons, traffic through the Zhankoy checkpoint has been temporarily blocked. Vehicles are passing through the Amyansk and Perekop checkpoints, Saldo reported. There are a couple of interesting points in this comment. First, there's no mention of drone debris. The old fallback hasn't been made, which tells us that Saldo hasn't got the memo from Moscow. You're not supposed to confirm that Ukraine was successful, Saldo. You're supposed to tell the world that Russian air defenses were so successful that they managed to blow up the Ukrainian drones at the precise spots that Ukraine wanted to hit. There are also the checkpoints that Saldo mentions. Armyansk and Perekop aren't exactly great alternatives. The latter is a very narrow route that isn't suitable for the large convoys of military equipment that Russia needs to shuttle between Crimea and the occupied southern regions of Ukraine. As for Armyansk, that's a little more robust. However, there just so happens to be a small bridge along that route that Russia needs to keep intact if it wants to carry on using this checkpoint. Is that going to be Ukraine's next target in its strategy to derussify Crimea? Time will tell. For now, Russia is scrambling to find alternatives to a route that connects to the R280 highway that Ukraine has been battering for most of May. Ukraine's military and drone units have already taken partial aerial control over that highway, as they have destroyed dozens of Russian vehicles along this key stretch of road over the past few weeks. Now the strategy has reached its next phase. First, take out the vehicles, next destroy the bridges that enable Russia to send those vehicles onto the R280 in the first place. This is brilliant from Ukraine, and it's a potential Crimea loser for Russia. What we've just seen from Ukraine isn't the first either. It's a long-awaited follow-up to an attack on the Chonhar Bridge that occurred back in August 2023. That strike saw Ukraine use Storm Shadow missiles to temporarily shut down the bridge, though Russian authorities at the time claimed that only one of the missiles hit its target, with the rest being shot down by air defenses. Russia wasn't quite so lucky this time, and Ukraine didn't rely on a Western-made weapon for its latest strike against the Chonhar Bridge. Every drone that hit home in the June 7th attack was made in Ukraine, and one of them was a drone that made its first ever appearance in the Ukraine war. That drone has the potential to be a game changer for Ukraine. But before we dig into why, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from the channel, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a video. So a new drone has entered the fight. What is it? The name tells you all that you need to know about why Ukraine's weapon is so dangerous. The Behemoth has landed. Many sources report that Ukraine unleashed its new drone for the first time alongside several FP drones made by Firepoint. The Behemoth is brand spanking new. It was only unveiled in May 2026, Pravda reports, and its specs show us that it is an impressive addition to Ukraine's middle-range strike arsenal. Developed by Culver Aerospace and Gleifer, the Behemoth has a strike radius of around 300 kilometers and a unique dual-warhead design that allows it to deliver a double dose of devastation to a target. The drone's nose is home to a high-explosive fragmentation warhead that weighs 40 kilograms. Behind that initial warhead is a second. Weighing 35 kilograms, this second warhead is thermobaric, otherwise known as a vacuum bomb. These warheads are lethal. When they hit their target, an explosive charge opens a container which scatters a fuel mixture that can get into the tiniest of crevices as a cloud that emanates from the warhead. Then comes the secondary charge, which detonates the cloud and creates a massive fireball. The resulting blast wave generates a vacuum that sucks up all surrounding oxygen, making the warhead powerful enough to destroy equipment and take out reinforced buildings. Or in this case, to destroy a vital bridge that Russia needs to maintain its grip on Crimea. The Behemoth is as versatile in terms of targeting as it is damaging when it explodes. The drone offers a range of control modes, including FPV operation and both autonomous and semi-autonomous navigation to ensure that it reaches its target. It's also a low-flying drone, which makes it incredibly difficult for air defense systems to intercept. Those systems are scanning the skies. The Behemoth flies right under their radar to strike. We're getting a sense of how Ukraine took out the Chonhar Bridge now. FP drones likely did the initial damage, striking with payloads of around 170 kilograms, assuming it was the FP2 that Ukraine used for its attack. That might not have been enough to destroy the bridge, but it would do damage and create the sorts of cracks and crevices that the Behemoth can exploit. A follow-up thermobaric strike would have been all that was needed to turn those cracks into gaping holes, taking the Chonhar Bridge out of commission for the foreseeable future. For Russia, the loss of the Chonhar Bridge is a massive blow, and if Ukraine is now looking in the direction of the Armyansk route that Russia has chosen as the alternative, another bridge may soon receive a visit from the Behemoth. Slowly but surely, Ukraine is cutting off every land route that Russia has into occupied Crimea, and it may be getting ready to strike the largest of those routes once more. We mentioned the Kerch Bridge at the beginning of the video. There was a reason for that. On June 5th, the news broke that Ukraine had taken out a Russian border patrol ship that was assigned to protect the Kerch Bridge. The Svitlyak-class ship was struck the day before the report, and it's part of the layered naval security network that Russia created around the bridge. That network is supposed to monitor all maritime approaches. Ukraine just took out part of it. What we may be seeing here is Ukraine setting up for the finale. A strike on the Kerch Bridge to follow up on the destruction of the Chonhar Bridge would send a clear message to Putin. All your land routes belong to Ukraine. Crimea will follow suit. Ukraine struck big on June 7th, and it may be setting up for something even bigger in the future as it quietly goes about dismantling Russia's Kerch Bridge security network. But now let's focus on Crimea. The 1.5 million Russians who occupy the peninsula will be watching on with horror. Once again, they've seen a strike that cuts them off from the Ukrainian mainland, and they're crying out for help from the Kremlin that isn't going to come. This is Ukraine's middle strike strategy in action. And this campaign is setting up the final phase of the de-Russification of Crimea. Russia's rear, and especially the portions that serve Crimea, has been taking a beating throughout May and into June. We've already mentioned Ukraine's strikes against the R280 highway, and the attack on the Chonhar Bridge feeds into those strikes. Severing that land corridor was one of the main objectives of the failed Ukrainian counteroffensive of 2023. The approach being taken now is different. Ukraine isn't looking to occupy yet, it's shooting for control with an asymmetric campaign that relies heavily on the new generation of middle-range drones that have grabbed the spotlight in 2026. Toward the end of May, Ukraine's defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov announced the formation of the Logistics Lockdown Program, which will see the ministry funnel almost $113 million into drone units that are taking out Russian logistics in the rear. That program builds on more than 1,000 geolocated middle-range strikes that Ukraine has already conducted in 2026, the New Voice of Ukraine reports, and it happens to coincide with a campaign against the R280 that has turned this vital land bridge into a highway from hell. But it's not just the R280 and the bridges that connect occupied Ukraine to the road that are in Ukraine's sights. Literally anything that serves the Russian occupation of Crimea is in the firing line of Ukraine's new drones. Anybody who has paid attention to how Ukraine conducts strikes will already be able to guess that the shattering of the Chonhar Bridge wasn't the country's only objective on June 7th. The same day also saw Ukraine's Special Operations Forces carrying out a devastating series of strikes against Russian oil infrastructure inside Crimea itself. Both the Semikholodezyanska oil depot and a maritime fuel terminal in Feodosia ended up in the firing line as Ukraine continues a campaign that is designed to starve occupied Crimea of the fuel that plays a role in helping Putin maintain control. Take away the fuel and you will strip the will of 1.5 million occupiers to remain on the peninsula. What we're seeing here is a layered middle-range strategy that is choking Russia at every point. With the Chonhar Bridge attack, Ukraine cuts Russian supply and troop shipments off at the source. Attacks on the R280 highway cripple the vehicles that Russia is sending to and from Crimea. And with attacks on oil depots and terminals inside Crimea itself, Ukraine is taking out what fuel is already on the peninsula, which builds on the problems that its strikes inside occupied Ukraine are creating. The writing is on the wall for Crimea. Ukraine is moving into the final phase of its de-Russification strategy, and Russia seems unable to do anything about it. The middle-range campaign is making all of this possible. Drones like the Behemoth simply didn't exist in Ukraine's arsenal as little as a year ago. Now those drones are limiting Russia's ability to conduct operational maneuvers on the front because they're tearing through command centers, logistics, and troop gatherings in the rear. For Crimea, which isn't on the front, the situation is different. The peninsula was supposed to be a safe haven from which Russia could deploy troops and send equipment into occupied regions of Ukraine. As Ukraine's drones grow stronger and rangier, that haven has become a hell. Crimea is being hit directly, and it's feeling the impact of the Logistics Lockdown Program that is choking off the peninsula's fuel supply. Fuel shortages abound. Since late May, motorists in the port city of Sevastopol have been limited to purchasing 20 liters of fuel per vehicle, and there is a blanket ban on filling up fuel containers. Images of queues stretching for as far as the eye can see are emerging from Crimea, and they're being accompanied by photographs of flaming wreckages of fuel trucks that are supposed to be supporting the peninsula. Gas stations all across Crimea are now running out of fuel entirely. Ukraine is bringing the war back to the 1.5 million occupiers that Putin inserted into the peninsula, but the Crimea strategy is about so much more than that. Isolation is the goal. The queues at Crimean gas stations are the most visible sign of this isolation in action. Ukraine is cutting off fuel, but it's also ruining the Crimean defenses that Putin has erected. A campaign of strikes against the peninsula has been designed to make Putin's position in Crimea untenable. From a strategic point of view, Crimea is slowly becoming useless to Russia as a military asset. Yes, drone teams can still launch attacks against Ukraine's cities from the peninsula. However, the Black Sea Fleet has been penned back, and Ukraine is now cutting off the logistical routes between Crimea and the occupied territories. Cutting off roads is key to the isolation that will make Crimea unusable for Russia. For Ukraine, this is all about forcing Putin to relinquish his grip on the peninsula. If Ukraine can retake control, it can then reach occupied settlements such as Berdyansk and Mariupol and develop a stronger presence in the Sea of Azov. Crimea is the linchpin, the focal point. Ukraine and Russia know it, and it's Ukraine that has taken the initiative in the battle for the peninsula. All of this is compounded by the fact that preserving the Russian military presence in Crimea is Putin's priority. That means most of the pressure from Ukraine's strikes is being exerted on the civilians of the peninsula and the puppet government that Putin installed. That government has to explain why there's no fuel at gas stations and why Russia's defenses are completely failing to stop Ukraine's drones, both in Crimea and inside the occupied territories. What we're now seeing is Ukraine transforming what is supposed to be one of Putin's biggest assets into a liability that he can't afford to maintain. By choking off Crimea, Ukraine prevents Russians from attacking vulnerable portions of the mainland directly. Ukraine also forces Putin into making difficult choices. If Russia funnels more defenses into Crimea, it weakens itself on the front line and inside its own territory. But failing to replace what Ukraine destroys leaves Crimea vulnerable to more strikes that send an even stronger message that it's time for 1.5 million occupiers to get out. The Chonhar Bridge was a lifeline for occupied Crimea. That's why we called it the jugular vein. Ukraine has sliced that vein open with an attack using a new drone. Russia will work day and night on repairs, but they won't matter. Even if the bridge is brought back online, the Behemoth and its FP brethren lie in wait, ready to strike once more. Other land routes, up to and including the Kerch Bridge, are also at risk. This is the final phase of Crimea's derussification. The Behemoth has landed, and the Chonhar Bridge is just the start. And it's not just the Behemoth that is a new drone taking out Russian logistics. On the R280 highway, another Ukrainian innovation is wreaking havoc. The war god Morrigan is here, and it's crippling Russia's Crimean supply lines. Find out more about this new drone and how Ukraine has been using it in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for daily updates on the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you as always for watching.